Some arrive like relief, others like gentle promises that soothe the ear and lull the mind. And in times of collective exhaustion, loneliness, and hurry, we crave comforting voices. That's where the danger begins. Because language, when skillfully shaped, doesn't just persuade, it controls. Manipulation rarely raises its voice. It speaks softly, sweetly. It knows exactly what someone longs to hear and wraps control in charm. The beauty of language becomes a varnish, a glossy coating over quiet domination. We live in an age where eloquence is mistaken for wisdom, where those who speak with grace are believed more readily than those who speak with honesty. And the more a message is repeated with confidence, the more it's taken as truth. Why? Because we all carry wounds, and beautiful words act like bandages, covering the pain without ever healing it. On the surface, things appear resolved, but underneath, we continue to follow ideas we barely understand, because words, no matter how lovely, mean nothing without action to match. They turn into a subtle yet powerful weapon. That's exactly what George Orwell exposed with precision in Animal Farm, a seemingly simple fable, yet deeply critical. In the book, the animals of a farm stage a revolution to free themselves from human oppression. They believe that under the leadership of the pigs, they will live in freedom, equality, and justice. But slowly, the leader's language turns into slogans. Catchy phrases replace real ideas, and those words stop serving the truth. They begin serving control. The problem is never in the words themselves, but in how they are used. When language is concentrated in the hands of a few, it stops being an expression and becomes a tool of domination and manipulation. It doesn't start with violence. It starts with hope, with sweet promises of a better future. It's in that moment, when a collective dream begins to take shape, that the deepest form of domination takes hold. Words like freedom, justice, and equality are so noble that they become unquestionable. In Animal Farm, the pigs aren't just selling a new political system, they're selling a feeling of belonging, of rebirth. The other animals, exhausted from exploitation, are swept up in the emotion. They believe, and when we believe deeply, we lower our guard. In the beginning, the language used by the pigs wasn't aggressive, it was inspiring, almost poetic. Real manipulation doesn't start with fear. It first wins the heart, then deceives the mind. When charming words present themselves as absolute truths, they blind us. Emotion, used strategically, paralyzes critical thinking, and many keep obeying not because they were forced, but because they feel like they're part of something grand, something for the good of all. That's why the idea of utopia can be dangerous when used as a tool for power. No one wants to seem ungrateful or selfish for questioning a beautiful ideal. In regimes that manipulate symbols and language, the enemy isn't the one who threatens the system. It's the one who dares to break the illusion. And few have the courage to be the first to see. Most people keep trusting even when the signs of abuse are already there, hidden beneath speeches full of good intentions. In these cases, a lie doesn't need to sound like the truth. It just needs to sound like hope. And when hope becomes the rule, reality can be reduced to a single phrase. In the book, the great promise was simple. All animals are equal. For a long time, that idea was repeated and believed. But the power of a speech isn't only in its content, it's also in how it's delivered. When a sentence is short, direct, and beautiful, it becomes almost sacred. It seems too clear to doubt and too pretty to criticize. But in this case, simplicity didn't bring clarity. It brought obedience. Orwell shows how power can hide in soft phrases. On the farm, the revolution promises equality and freedom. At first, everyone believes they will live free. But slowly, the pigs take control and begin to use language as a means of domination. One of the most effective tools of the new regime is precisely the slogan painted on the wall, a brief absolute phrase that comes to outweigh any law. It seeps into conversations, into thoughts, into dreams. The world starts to be interpreted through that one sentence, and all nuance disappears. Even when some animals receive obvious privileges, no one questions it. After all, who wants to seem ungrateful in the face of such a beautiful promise? Constant repetition gives the lie the tone of truth, and that's how the perfect ground for manipulation is laid. With phrases that sound too simple to be questioned, The speech becomes an emotional language. It doesn't invite thought, it invites feeling. Whenever someone hesitates, the group repeats the slogan. The beauty of the phrase becomes a golden cell. The lie doesn't need to be complex. It just needs to be said with confidence, and the more it's repeated, the more real it seems. Over time, repetition eliminates the need for explanation. And when no one demands clarity anymore, thought retires. Persistence becomes silent domination. The mind, hearing the same words over and over, starts accepting them as natural truths, as if they had always been there. Just like water carves through stone with persistent repeated speech, it wears down the conscience until it stops resisting. On the farm, the pigs knew it wasn't necessary for everyone to understand, just to accept. Squealer, the pig in charge of propaganda, was a master at using sweet words to hide lies. All it took was a short emotional sentence repeated with conviction. The tone mattered more than the content. Little by little, truth gave way to familiarity. What's repeated daily begins to feel safe, and what feels safe starts to seem right. That's how manipulation settles in. It doesn't need to convince right away, it just needs to be there every day. Over time, it becomes part of the scenery, like an old piece of furniture no one questions anymore. Truth gives way to comfort, and free thought turns into an echo. But repetition prepares the ground for something even more dangerous, the rewriting of facts. As time goes by, the commandments of the revolution, those that once promised freedom and equality, begin to quietly change. A never turns into a sometimes, and everyone becomes a some. Small words, subtle changes, but it changes everything. And the animals, exhausted and confused, keep working without time or strength to remember what used to be true. This is one of authoritarianism's most effective tactics. Not to erase memory, but to empty it. The past, once shared, becomes the property of the leaders, and anyone who tries to remember is seen as a threat, a traitor, an obstacle to progress. Doubt, which was once a virtue, now becomes a crime. Rewriting facts is more effective than censoring them. The new version of the story is told with such confidence, such beauty, that no one dares to challenge it. Truth is reshaped to serve the interests of power, and everything that doesn't fit the official narrative disappears. Not because it was banned, but because no one remembers it anymore. Language, which once served to liberate, now serves to erase. And when memory fails, fear steps in. Fear doesn't need to make sense. It arrives before doubt, like a hunch. Sometimes it's just a strange silence, a sideways glance, a sudden absence. In the book, the animals notice that those who disagree disappear. And when they return, if they return, they come back silent, bent. Repression doesn't scream. It hovers like fog, invisible, but suffocating. Napoleon, the pig who takes control of the farm, never needs to explain himself. It's enough to suggest that any disagreement is a sign of betrayal. Symbolic terror becomes its own language. Justification is no longer necessary. It's enough to remind everyone that questioning comes with a cost. And so, thought is replaced by the fear of loss. Fear is effective because it wears a disguise. It dresses in smiles, promises, and gentle words. When a society or a farm starts to avoid certain gestures, certain thoughts, certain words, control is already complete. Censorship no longer needs to come from the outside. Everyone learns to police themselves. And in this environment, even morality bends because whoever controls fear also decides what is right and wrong. There's no need to change actions, only to change the names. In Animal Farm, the pigs learn this quickly. Calling someone a traitor is enough to make their elimination seem like justice. A cruel act becomes labeled as necessary. Language is twisted until values are completely inverted. Words like sacrifice, loyalty, and duty, once symbols of nobility, become tools of control. Affection turns into submission. Conscience becomes obedience. Language functions like a distorted mirror. It reflects something familiar but changes everything inside. Slowly, cruelty disguises itself as protection, and blind obedience as virtue. At this point, the moral inversion is complete. Good is no longer what preserves dignity, but what serves the system. Ethics no longer come from within. They are imposed from above. And the animals, or the people, keep repeating phrases they don't understand but have learned to treat as sacred. The speech remains beautiful, but now it serves something even more dangerous. It teaches people to love their own submission. And the most tragic part is that those who repeat these phrases with the most enthusiasm are not always the oppressors. Often, they are the naive. Naivety, when paired with blind loyalty, becomes one of the most powerful weapons of an authoritarian regime. The naive don't question, don't doubt, don't hesitate. They believe, and believe with all their heart. In Animal Farm, that role is played by Boxer, the hard-working and obedient horse. His motto is simple: I will work harder. He repeats it like a prayer, believing that effort will solve everything. But he doesn't realize he's being exploited. He can't see the manipulation around him. He just keeps going day after day, carrying the weight of a system that uses him until he's no longer needed. This is the trap of good intentions. They can be used as a shield to maintain domination. Those who believe they're doing good rarely notice they're serving something harmful. And those in power know this. They know that the most reliable support doesn't come from those seeking advantage, but from those who are loyal. That's why they cultivate obedience as a virtue, surrender as nobility, and sacrifice as honor. And so, the naive, without meaning to, become the wall that upholds tyranny. They reinforce the rules, repeat the speeches, silence the doubts, not out of malice but out of fear of betraying what they believe in. The system doesn't need everyone to be aware. It only needs enough people willing to comply. And the more these people believe they're doing the right thing, the stronger the system becomes. Power rarely sustains itself through violence alone. It survives on the loyalty of those who can't see what lies behind it. The most effective form of manipulation doesn't turn enemies into allies. It turns allies into tools. And when fear mixes with devotion, a craving for order is born, even if that order costs freedom. In times of uncertainty, any firm voice seems like salvation. The price doesn't matter as long as someone tells us what to do. That's when authoritarianism steps in, not with shouting, but with promises of stability. In Animal Farm, the animals, tired of collective decision-making, end up accepting that Napoleon, the most authoritarian pig, takes full control of the farm. The justification was simple: someone has to lead. Freedom, which once symbolized victory, comes to be seen as an obstacle to peace. This is one of the deepest manipulations, making autonomy feel like a burden. A strong leader seems comforting because it frees each individual from the responsibility of thinking, deciding, taking risks. And the language that surrounds this moment is always soft, wrapped in good intentions. It's for the good of all. It's only temporary. It's for your safety. But what starts as an exception quickly becomes the rule. The temporary leader becomes permanent. Over time, freedom turns into a dangerous luxury. Those who question are labeled ungrateful. Those who disagree are seen as threats. Those who still remember the ideal of equality no longer find space because most people prefer the relief of obedience over the burden of choice. The system doesn't grow strong through fear alone, but because it offers rest. Thinking becomes exhausting, choosing risky, and so domination solidifies silently, not imposed, but accepted. The revolution, which was born as a promise of change, turns into theater. New faces, old mechanisms. Changing leaders changes nothing when the logic of power stays the same. The revolution, captured by vanity and the thirst for control, stops being a path and becomes a performance. In Animal Farm, the pigs who once condemned the humans begin to imitate them. They sleep in beds, walk on two legs, trade with old enemies. Everything that once represented oppression is now called progress. But there was no real transformation, only a role reversal. The throne changed hands. The people kept being exploited. This is the cruel cycle of domination. Names change, faces change, but power remains intact. What was once enforced with chains is now enforced with well-crafted phrases. Repression modernizes, Language becomes more polished, the rituals look more refined. But deep down, the injustice remains alive. Privilege puts on a new outfit. Exploitation gets a new name. And the show appears perfect. Applause comes from all sides, even from those who remain hungry. Even when everything seems to have changed, language remains the final veil that covers brutality with well-arranged words. Beauty soothes the eye even when it masks horror. When used skillfully, language can dress up even violence. In Animal Farm, Squealer, the pig in charge of propaganda, is a master of this art. He doesn't lie outright, he simply decorates the lie. He gives absurdity a logical appearance. He gives injustice a tone of sacrifice. And the animals, tired and vulnerable, accept it because when cruelty is dressed in elegance, it doesn't shock. It slips in. Manipulation doesn't survive by hiding, but by beautifying. The most violent actions aren't denied, they're renamed. Punishment becomes discipline, betrayal becomes protection of order, and over time, language drifts away from reality. It no longer reveals the world, it reshapes it. It no longer clarifies, it conceals. This aesthetic of speech works like a collective anesthetic. The pain doesn't vanish, it just loses its name. Tragedies seem smaller because they come with logical explanations. Hunger becomes a production adjustment. Repression becomes peacekeeping. And anyone who points out the absurd is discredited, labeled too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult. The coldness of power presents itself as balance. And slowly, the people learn to smile at what should ignite revolt. But even in the middle of this fog of polished speeches, something still resists, the silent discomfort of those who feel something is wrong, even if they can't explain it. That unease is the first sign that passivity is starting to crack. Passivity is never total. Even when everything seems quiet, there's a thread of unrest running through the silence. Deep down, everyone senses that something doesn't quite fit. Hunger, fear, and nameless sadness. All of it returns, even when language tries to convince us that everything is fine. This is where passivity reveals its true face, not as the absence of strength but as a form of defense, a way of staying sane in the face of absurdity. In Animal Farm, the animals keep obeying, but their eyes grow more and more vacant, not out of belief, but out of exhaustion. They've already been defeated, not just outwardly but internally. This emotional surrender is one of the subtlest weapons of control. Moral fatigue takes the place of thought. Hope gives way to resignation. Obedience, once voluntary, becomes anesthesia. And the question changes. It's no longer, is this right? But is it even worth questioning? At this stage, the system no longer needs to justify itself. It simply continues. The oppression no longer comes only from outside. It transforms into internal surrender. The flame of outrage fades slowly until only a small ember remains, almost invisible. But even the faintest ember can reignite. Sometimes all it takes is a gesture, a word, a glance, something small that makes someone remember they once dreamed of freedom, of justice, of meaning. And in that almost accidental instant, the possibility of rupture is born. Because even when everything seems settled, there's always someone on the verge of waking up. That awakening doesn't begin with a scream. It begins in silence, but not an empty silence, a silence that listens. When everything quiets inside, when memorized phrases lose their meaning and enthusiasm dries,